we denounce these illegal tariffs, and we think that they're a direct attack against our workers and now on in the copper industry, and so we'll fight against them.
At first, Canada waited, but now it has broken its silence. Industry Minister Melanie Joly publicly denounced the measure, calling it illegal under international trade rules and a direct attack on Canadian workers. Behind the scenes, Joly has been meeting with executives from major mining firms like Glencore and Teck Resources, as well as union leaders. Canada is no longer in observation mode. It is preparing to respond. And this moment is about more than copper. It's about whether rules still matter in the world's most important trading relationship.
So Glencore and them, those are Canadian companies that both mine copper. A tariff to this critical mineral would be a blow to Canada.
The anger is rooted not just in economics, but in disruption. Canada exports a significant volume of copper to the US, and for regions like Quebec, that trade is tightly linked to jobs and production. Even provinces that sell more to Asia are now caught in a cycle of volatility. For producers, it's no longer about adjusting to new policies. It's about navigating a climate where long-term planning is nearly impossible and where every morning could bring another shock. For the Trump administration, disruption is the point. The copper tariff, like the steel and aluminum tariffs before it, is being imposed under Section 232 of the U.S. Trade Expansion Act on the grounds of national security. But few believe copper from Canada threatens U.S. security. In fact, many experts say the real target is China, the world's largest supplier of refined copper. By hitting all exporters equally, the U.S. creates a broad web of pressure. The goal is simple: force countries to sign new bilateral trade agreements, or risk being left out entirely. This tactic now has a name in Washington: Liberation Day tariffs. Over 20 countries have received letters warning them of impending duties. Even allies like Japan and South Korea weren't spared. Canada was, for a time, left off the list. But with the copper tariff now confirmed, it's clear: no one is fully safe. And for Canada, this tariff lands in the middle of a fragile negotiation.
The idea here for Canada is just to get back to respect for the trade agreement that President Trump himself negotiated, in his first term.
As the U.S. pushes forward, Canada is shifting from patience to preparation. Ottawa's approach has not been loud, but it has been deliberate. Over the past 2 weeks, Canada has ramped up internal consultations across ministries, provinces, and industries, especially in regions like Quebec and Ontario, where the impact could be immediate. Minister Joly's meetings with Glencore and Teck Resources weren't symbolic. They were the start of response planning, and that planning now comes with a clear timeline. Canada has tied its response to July 21st, giving both sides less than 2 weeks to find a resolution. If no agreement is reached by then, retaliation is firmly on the table. Steel tariffs are among the options, ones Canada has used before and is prepared to use again. Behind the scenes, the message is clear: if diplomacy stalls, countermeasures won't. This is not just a story about copper. It's a story about trust and how easily it can be broken. Trump may see tariffs as tools of leverage, but allies see them as weapons used without warning. And that shift, from partner to target, could have long-term consequences. Canada isn't folding, but it also isn't escalating yet. What happens in the next 10 days could decide whether North America remains a free trade zone or falls deeper into a spiral of tit-for-tat protectionism. And in this moment, the question isn't just whether Canada will fight back, it's whether the rules that built the global trade system can survive another round of shock.
The U.S. president also signed and sent off letters today to several countries, including 2 major trading partners.
The president is threatening to raise the tariffs on Japan and South Korea if they reciprocate with levies of their own.
On July 7th, President Donald Trump announced that formal letters had been sent to Japan and South Korea. Starting August 1st, all exports from these countries into the United States would face a 25% tariff. These weren't routine policy updates. They were public warnings, delivered through Truth Social, meant to pressure. And while aimed at securing trade concessions, the impact has been deeper, shaking alliances, markets, and America's global credibility.
These would be 25% tariffs on all Japanese and South Korean exports into the U.S., effective on August 1st. Changes saying, quote, these tariffs may be modified upwards or downwards depending on our relationship with your country. Is that there is no certainty.
Japan and South Korea are not just trade partners. They are cornerstone allies, economically, strategically, militarily. Yet the letters treated them no differently than geopolitical rivals. The 25% tariff matches the reciprocal rate framework Trump introduced on April 2nd. South Korea had already faced this rate. Japan was at 24%. Now, both face the full increase starting August 1st, unless they open their markets to U.S. goods. Markets reacted swiftly. On July 7th, Nissan's stock fell 5%. Toyota dropped 1.25%, Honda 1.5%. U.S. indices also dipped. Dow, Nasdaq, and S&P 500 all fell about 1%. This wasn't about numbers alone. It was about trust. And trust once broken is difficult to rebuild. America's Asian alliances are now under strain not because of war, but because of a letter. The White House insists this is a calculated strategy, a show of strength, a negotiation tactic. The tariffs, they say, are conditional. If Japan or South Korea retaliate, the rates will rise further. If they open up, they might come down. But here's the catch. Behind the scenes, Treasury officials admit there's not enough bandwidth to negotiate one-on-one with over 100 countries. Many, especially smaller economies, will simply face blanket tariffs between 10% and 25%, regardless of context. Trump's executive order signed July 7th pushed the original July 9th tariff deadline to August 1st. It gave more time, but not more clarity. The administration's plan for customized deals for every country sounds powerful on paper. But without capacity to follow through, it risks becoming a chaotic patchwork of threats with no structure. And this uncertainty, what happens if deals don't materialize, is exactly what markets and foreign leaders fear. This isn't targeted protectionism. It's tariff diplomacy by pressure, and it's backfiring. With negotiations already underway, Canada wasn't among the countries that received a tariff letter. That's because it's already deep in trade talks with the U.S., with a deadline set for July 21st. Canada's recent withdrawal of its digital services tax opened the door to dialogue. But Prime Minister Mark Carney hasn't conceded further. Instead, Canada is quietly preparing domestic support packages, especially for its aluminum industry, which is still facing U.S. tariffs of up to 50%. Ottawa isn't reacting emotionally. It's planning strategically, holding the line until the U.S. either offers a reasonable deal or overreaches. Then there's China. For now, Beijing hasn't received a new tariff letter. The U.S. and China remain under a temporary tariff truce through mid-August. But officials in Beijing are watching closely. By fracturing U.S. relationships with Japan and South Korea, Trump may be doing China's work for them. Beijing isn't rushing to escalate. Instead, it's likely positioning itself to benefit from any lasting rift in the U.S.-Asia alliance system. Trump's letter may not have shocked China, but it certainly interested them. Trump's tariff letters are meant to force deals, to show strength. But they've exposed a different reality. Japan and South Korea, once among America's most reliable allies, are now bracing for economic penalties from the very country they've supported for decades. Canada is quietly resisting. And China, so far, is playing the long game, waiting for divisions to deepen. America still holds the cards. But diplomacy built on pressure alone doesn't just fail to persuade. It pushes partners away. And in a world where alliances matter more than ever, these letters may end up isolating the United States, one ally at a time.
When the person you're dealing with or the country you're dealing with has multiple objectives, it jumps around a bit and you've got to be nimble.
If we do see some trade deals coming through, obviously with our country, that would be, I think, a big boost.
President Trump has set the clock ticking toward August 1st, the day when his new global tariff framework kicks in, with import taxes of 10% to 70% for countries that don't sign trade deals in time. And while many governments are scrambling to meet the deadline, one country has taken a different path: Canada. In this final stretch, with pressure mounting and time running out, The world is watching whether Prime Minister Mark Carney will bend to Trump's demands or make the most calculated gamble of his career. With tariffs looming, markets rallied on hope. Wall Street bet that Canada would fold quickly, just like others had. Trump had already declared his intent. If a deal wasn't reached by July 21st, tariffs would rise automatically. No more grace periods, no more backroom extensions. And yet, Canada didn't fold. No major concessions were announced. No dramatic press conferences, no movement at the podium. Instead, there was a calm, strategic silence. The usual Trump playbook, high pressure, short timeline, visible chaos, was met with something unexpected: restraint. Investors kept waiting for news. Business leaders, especially those in steel and automotive supply chains, feared the worst. But from Ottawa, the only response was stillness.
Carney's approach emphasized how Canada can help the White House on China, on balance of trade issues, on protections for workers, and on border security.
Behind that silence was Prime Minister Mark Carney. A former central banker, Carney wasn't looking to play by Trump's rules. Instead of bargaining point by point, he shifted the game entirely. At the Calgary Stampede, Carney addressed Albertans directly, not just with words, but with strategy. He called on Canadians to focus inward, on housing, on clean energy, on rebuilding economic independence. He knew what Trump wanted: quick wins, bold headlines. But Carney wasn't playing for the moment. He was playing for stability. Rather than debating dairy quotas or aluminum percentages, Carney brought something different to the table: value. Canada, he argued, could help the U.S. where it mattered: on trade with China, on labor protections, on border security. This wasn't just a defense, it was a repositioning, a way to say, we're not your opponent, we're your ally in a bigger fight. And it started working. Markets across North America responded with optimism. The TSX and S&P 500 both hit record highs during the first week of July. According to Bloomberg, much of that optimism stemmed from perceived progress in the US-Canada talks, especially after Canada stepped away from the digital services tax that had angered Washington. But that optimism might have been premature. Because while Trump's team expected a full deal by July 21st, Carney wasn't rushing. The days ticked down. Trump grew louder, but Carney remained still. And that's when Trump faced a problem he hadn't planned for. What happens when the pressure doesn't work? If Canada holds firm past July 21st, Trump must make a decision. Either follow through with punishing tariffs, which could trigger job losses across border states, or back down and risk looking weak.
Reach a deal, and I just wonder what you think about what messaging should be going out to Canadians in a moment that it seems precarious, but of course we don't really know.
I think folks are just hoping to hear from their Prime Minister and from Canadian officials that they're on it and that they're doing everything they can and that they have Canadians back.
The economic stakes are real. Canada's services PMI fell to 44.3 in June, according to S&P Global, well below growth thresholds. U.S. companies, especially in auto parts and logistics, are already cutting forecasts due to uncertainty over cross-border flows. Both economies would suffer. But politically, Carney has space to wait. Polls show Canadians understand the stakes and the personality across the table. Trump, on the other hand, has no such room. His trade narrative depends on fast, visible wins. Delays don't just cost time, they cost credibility. In this trade standoff, Trump has the microphone, but Carney holds the clock. The louder Trump pushes, the more his own deadline becomes a trap. And the longer Carney waits, the more he turns Trump's strength into a vulnerability. This isn't about who talks more. It's about who understands the moment better. And right now, silence is speaking louder than ever.